Welcome to the From Harm to Healing podcast. I'm your host, Chris Jones, and I'm a therapist who runs the From Harm to Healing treatment program, an online program for men who have engaged in infidelity or compulsive sexual behaviors within the context of an intimate relationship. I started this podcast to illuminate some of the common blind spots within the treatment fields for compulsive sexual behavior or sex addiction through the lens of the deceptive sexuality trauma model. I hope you find this resource enlightening, particularly if you're somebody navigating the pain of betrayal and deception for yourself. Thank you for listening to the From Harm to Healing podcast. In the last two episodes, I've brought you two parts of a longer conversation I had with Dr. Omar Minwalla about the three I's of integrity, intimacy, and integration. The first episode covered the integrity part. Last episode was about intimacy, and in today's episode I'm posting the rest of the conversation where we spoke particularly about this idea of integration. We organically sort of moved from integrity, intimacy into this third I of integration. And I would say from my own experience, having done pretty extensive work now with this model and gone through these three I's with many, many clients, that the integration is the piece that is sort of maybe harder to explain in a sense, and certainly harder for people to maybe understand and take on board fully. So there's a sort of intuitive sense of once they are illuminated to it, of integrity, yes, that is very clear, and the need is very clear. Intimacy, yes, I'm starting to understand that better, and I can understand why I need that, how that impacts me, impacts the relationship. And then when we talk about integration, there's naturally a lot of overlap with those two things. So if I'm living in a disintegrated or compartmentalized way, naturally it follows that there's a lack of integrity in that system. And also, if I'm living in a compartmentalized way, suppressing parts of myself, not in self-contact, that goes straight to the intimacy we've talked about. So it would be great to just start this point on integration by getting your basic definition, if you like, and just laying out how we're seeing that as overlapping but also unique from the integrity and intimacy.
Sure. So yes, integrity, intimacy, integration. Integration, I think, is a very big word. It has a lot of different applications, actually. But the most direct reason for that is if you've had a secret sexual basement, right? You have the first thing, a dishonesty problem, a problem with your relationship with yourself. That's the intimacy part. And then you're living a double life. That's not integrated. That's a split life right there. So nothing could be more a better example than having a secret sexual basement as a lack of integration, not living one reality, good, bad, or ugly, keeping it all upstairs in one reality, instead having a separate reality that's being maintained sometimes for years. So that's very fragmented, very split. Living a double life is a high state of a lack of integration. And so that's really the central way to think about it, is these three I's are really defining what's the problem with having a secret sexual basement. It's a dishonesty problem, an intimacy with the self problem, and a lack of integration, good, bad, or ugly, keeping everything upstairs and living one life. Like I said, any person can build a secret sexual basement, but a lot of men build a secret sexual basement. And they're groomed basically as a way to live life, is having this place you can go where your family and wife doesn't know, and you can engage in sex, and that's the way you cope. You Don't have to deal with feelings using your voice. You can just do this instead. And it's part of male culture. We collude with each other. So um, the lack of integration is really high for men. And from that perspective, women don't have that same escape valve to deal with life. They have to deal with life in a much more integrated way. Whether it's hard, disturbing, whatever it is, they're learning how to deal with life upstairs and don't have this social permission to have a little secret coping life on the side. So integration can also mean, have you dealt with all these underlying factors in the iceberg, your childhood wounds, different types of abuse that you've never dealt with? That all now needs to be integrated, right? Learning how to deal with emotions instead of pushing them away and actually inviting them in and being curious about them, like opening up FedEx packages rather than not opening up FedEx packages. When your emotions get delivered, are you actually opening them up and putting them under the microscope and looking down with curiosity and compassion, or not? That's another meaning of integration. Are you helping someone integrate their emotional system in a different way? Another big meaning of that word here is there's a whole reality that needs to be integrated. Not just the sexual behavior, but like we've been talking about, there's a whole dishonesty system, a whole gaslighting system, putting someone in a state of intentionally manipulated reality. That's a type of abuse. And then the people getting harmed are the people upstairs. Those are the victims. And then they're experiencing trauma. We have 22 identified symptoms and types of trauma impacts. So there's this whole, what I call, reality that's in the dark. And the acronym I use for that reality is abuse, victim, trauma, reality. When it comes to infidelity, when it comes to secret sexual lives, nobody really sees those three words: abuse, victim, trauma. So that's why I literally made that an acronym. Abuse, victim, trauma is the reality that's in the dark. And helping people see that reality is one part of the process. And then helping them not only see it, but come to terms with it and slowly digest it. That whole process of looking at reality, coming to terms with it, and slowly digesting it, that is a process of integration and metabolization and integration. It's a really hard reality to look at. And it's really tempting to turn away and not want to look at it. And it takes a lot of help and facilitation to help people look at such a huge reality like we have in the secret sexual basement, which might be 30 years of gaslighting someone. And the people, the intimate partner upstairs has been a victim of a covert operation for years, a psychological operation. So especially for men, it's really hard to look at this reality. And a big part of the work is helping them look at this reality and slowly integrate it and come to terms with it. And so that's a big part of integration as well. That process of looking at the harm, looking at the abuse, victim, trauma reality, and slowly integrating it is actually called mountain work in my work with men. We call that mountain work. It's just simply using a metaphor of someone who bombed a village and now over time has the strength to go to the top of the mountain and slowly start reconciling and look down at the village they bombed and slowly start reconciling between two things: their ego, who they are, and the reality on the ground, the abuse, victim, trauma reality. And how do they reconcile those two things and come to terms with that? That's a form of integration. I actually call that shadow work. And so that's, I think, a really good term. When we talk about integration, we're talking about helping people do shadow work, especially the abuser with mountain work, helping him understand the damage he's caused, those 22 injuries, this abuse victim trauma reality. That's a big part of his shadow work. And, but in general, integration means helping people develop a system, a way of living life where when a piece of their shadow reality emerges, instead of pushing it away, they learn to integrate it, meaning owning it, metabolizing it, and letting it become part of the whole. That's what integration means. It means taking something in and allowing it to become part of the whole, right? So integration is about creating wholeness, consolidating, not being fragmented and split. The more consolidated your ego is, the more strength you have. The more fragmented, the more weak and vulnerable the ego is. When you have a basement, you're in a highly non-consolidated state. You're literally pushing a whole reality down and pretending. And so there's a real lack of internal cohesion there. So shadow integration, Carl Jung, right? Carl Jung, the psychologist, that's his term, the shadow. And the shadow means all the stuff that we really don't want to admit about ourselves. That's too painful, too shameful, too ugly, and it's too difficult for us to even admit. And maybe we're not ready to see things about ourselves. And all of these things live in the shadow. And every human being has a shadow. We all have a light and a dark. That's how the psyche is. That's what Carl Jung talked about. We all have a shadow. We all have stuff that's really ugly about ourselves or shameful or that's hard to accept. And a healthy way of being psychologically, a healthy way of living life is learning how to integrate your shadow. And when things emerge, you know, as you live life, certain aspects of your shadow get reflected to you. They become conscious. Those are opportunities to understand that part, metabolize it, make it conscious. And if it's legitimate, to own it, accept it, and pull it in. Okay, this is part of me. This is part of my identity now. This has meaning for me. This is part of me and my life, versus pushing it away. A lot of people learn to live life by pretending to be all light and denying the dark, pretending to be all light and pushing away the shadow. What that actually is self-deception and self-delusion. And it's a very unhealthy state. It's actually a very weak and vulnerable state. And when people are not owning their shadow, they're at high risk of projecting it and attacking others. And these parts of themselves, they put on other people and then attack and feel entitled to attack. So it's very dangerous, actually, to not be owning your shadow. You're in a vulnerable state of hurting yourself and other people. It's healthy to be able to tolerate and develop a system of owning your shadow. And when we force light and dark together, when we force the light and dark together, that's the definition of alchemy, is forcing light and dark. And when we force that, that's where transformation happens. That's the definition of alchemy. That's the definition of growth. When you own your shadow and consolidate your ego and take in bits of reality despite how hard it is, doing that work makes you stronger and more consolidated. You can think of it as parts of yourself, your shadow, knocking on your door. And do you open the door and them in and give them a cup of tea and let them sit at the table and give them a voice and hear them out and understand them and allow them to have a place in the home and the family at the table? Or when these shadow elements knock on the door, do you not answer? Do you not let them in? Do you slam the door on their face? Right? And then those denied shadow parts of us don't go away just because we're not looking at them or denying them. They're actually going to come in the back door and wreak havoc in your life. So that's why it's so much better to become conscious of these parts and these aspects of ourselves, own them, and then you have more control and can negotiate. And so you're in a much more adaptive zone psychologically. A lot of people, though, don't think that way. And like I said, a lot of people are socialized to pretend that they're all light and deny the shadow and be in a high state of self-deception. When you're owning your shadow, you're becoming more becoming more whole and integrated. That's holiness. Pretending you're all light and calling that holy, that's not holiness. That's fake and inauthenticity and a high state of self-deception, pretending you're all light and you have no shadow. And thinking that's the way to navigate life is to just present all light and pretend you're all light and deny the shadow. That's not healthy. People who own their shadow and integrate and consolidate their ego and become more whole. Wholeness is holiness. Wholeness is holiness. Not pretending you're all light. That's not holiness. That's self-delusion. Yeah. So, how's that for integration?
Feels like you've kind of nailed it there. A couple of things jump up for me on a personal level. I'm kind of singing inside when you say some of that stuff near the end, because I think we see even in the therapeutic world a lot of the sort of positive psychology, pop psychology stuff that's all just, it's not dealing with reality a lot of the time. And that word reality feels like that's one of the most important words in this model, in this work. You know, we've talked about deceptive, compartmentalized sexual relational reality. We've talked about intentionally manipulated reality. Talked about intentionally accurate, authentic reality. Talked about the partner's reality being fractured. This reality. And it seems like the most fundamental starting point and way of summing up this third eye is dealing with reality as it is. The reality of what I have done, if I've built and maintained a secret sexual basement, the reality of the harm I've caused, the reality of who I am, including the parts I'm ashamed of, parts I've suppressed. It goes back to, we talked about complex sexuality shaping and sexual constriction, connection with that part, integrating that part of myself. So that word of reality, it's probably the word we've used the most in this whole conversation. And I guess it hits me that even people listening to this, because you talked about the 22 rooms and the 22 identified forms of traumatic impact and some of the specific tools we have and some of the therapeutic things we can do. But it strikes me that integration starts from day one with this work, in that someone might be listening to this who's built and maintained a secret sexual basement, maybe is still in a secret sexual basement, and they've heard that word abuse put to it for the first time. That's something to integrate. That alone, just integrating that word into my reality, my ego, because I might be able to see, okay, when I see it broken down, I can see why this is an abusive system. I can see the harm caused from the bombed village, to use your analogy or your metaphor. But I'm not an abuser. That doesn't fit with my positive image or my ego. So straight away, there's some integration that needs to happen there. So yeah, it just again strikes me that right from day one, the integration, whilst it's maybe the harder bit to explain and pick at in some ways, it's right there from the beginning.
First of all, yes, reality is the key word. The whole abuse is the abuse of someone's reality. That's one way to say it. Having a secret sexual life is abusing the partner's reality the whole time. You're manipulating and shaping it. So it's reality abuse. That's one way to think about it. And then there's so many ways that we use that word reality: intentionally manipulated reality, intentionally accurate, authentic reality, reality ego fragmentation. And how healthy it is when we are in touch with reality and truth, and how health promoting that is, whether it's owning our shadow or speaking truth or feeling integrity inside, and how the opposite's true when we're lying, when we have a lack of integrity, when we're tricking people. It's a whole system of injustice and toxic vibrations. So this idea of reality, you nailed it with, that's the key word here. And the abuse itself is, one way to say it would be, it's abusing someone's reality, not their body, not just their body, not just their emotions, not just their psyche. It's their whole reality is being manipulated. And that's the definition in military terms of a covert operation. A covert psychological operation is about intentionally manipulating people's emotions, perceptions of reality with certain agenda and outcomes. So reality abuse is a really key word. Yeah. All right. What was the next question though? I think you asked something.
I was going to link it again, similar to with the intimacy, to we talked about from the personal point of view, how the person needs to integrate the harm caused, integrate parts of the self. And I'm thinking again in terms of how that shows up with what we call the attending, the ability for that person to attend to the traumatic impacts of their behaviors. And so I talked earlier about how the partner's pain, the pain, the impact that the partner is experiencing now holds a direct mirror up to that person that's caused that pain. So every time my partner experiences a trigger or just experiences significant emotions to do with that impact, if I have not integrated those parts of myself, then I'm going to crumble, because the mirror that's being held up is something that I don't want to look at. So to me, it's personal work. But again, if we want any chance at really working towards relational healing or relational justice, where we're actually undoing the power differentials and we are actually moving forward in a sort of restorative justice way, it seems to be a necessary thing, again, not just an optional thing, a necessary thing to have actually integrated that. So again, I just wanted your thoughts on that really, and how it then moves into the maybe the relational aspect and safety for the partner.
Yeah. So I think that it's it does go along with this idea of integration. And I think you mentioned earlier just this reality that needs to be integrated, starting with just the A word, abuse, and being an abuser. That alone is very, very difficult to integrate for so many reasons. And it takes me a lot of time to slowly help people turn towards that term, that word, especially the abusers, the people who built the basements, come to terms with it, understand it intellectually first, and then slowly help them emotionally take that on deeper and deeper. And so that whole process is a form of integrating the concept of abuse. There's a similar process sometimes just identifying with the sexual problem, people who are in recovery for sex addiction or compulsivity, in the beginning, just saying sex addict was hard. That needed to be integrated slowly over time. First, understanding what it is, maybe being at a 12-step meeting and hearing other people say, I'm a sex addict. Maybe they tried it on at first and it was really hard to say. And over time, saying it over and over again, coming to terms with it, adjusting to it, being able to tolerate it, having less shame, allows people to integrate. And now they can say, I'm a sex addict, and it's very different. It's more integrated. Same thing has to happen with the reality of abuse. And it might be even more difficult given how we view the word abuse in our cultures and society. People are not educated on what that word means. And there's a lot of misunderstandings of what that word means, right? And you can use the word harm, but it's hard to look at the word abuse. It's hard to look at how we've harmed people. These are really challenging things to integrate. And like you said, Chris, if your partner is in high trauma, then there's a constant reflection of the harm you caused. And if you can't deal with that, if you can't even sit with that for a second, if you can't even tolerate the thought that you caused that kind of harm, then it's going to be very hard for the relational healing to really move forward. So there's a really important initial step or first few steps around just integrating the reality of abuse and the harm, the trauma. And that's why I use that term AVT, abuse victim trauma reality. That's exactly a lot of my work is helping everyone see, not only illuminate this reality that's been in the dark, starting with naming it, which is really hard, but not just naming it and then slowly coming to terms with it. And then when they're ready and stabilized, actually metabolizing it. And that metabolizing is actually, instead of pushing this reality away and ignoring it, it's actually a way of illuminating it, coming to terms with it, and then slowly integrating and metabolizing and digesting it. And this reality that I'm talking about, abuse victim trauma reality, that's precisely the reality that's in the dark that nobody sees clearly. And so I call it the gigantic elephant in the room. And then my treatment model is all about naming the elephant, taming the elephant, eating the elephant. All of that process is just about coming to terms with reality and truth and helping people digest it in a safe, stable way. Eating elephant, coming to terms and dealing and metabolizing the truth. All that whole process and the entire treatment model is a process of integrating truth. Integration, taking the truth and slowly chewing on it, getting the nutrients and growing from it. Yeah.
So we have all of this beautiful complexity. We've talked about the iceberg diagram, the behavioral systems, CES, IAD, the shaping, sexuality, gender, trauma shaping, underneath the surface, integrity, intimacy, integration. And then you've also kind of summarized it in a simple form as, I think, twice in this conversation, you talked about the model at its core when we really distill it down. IMR to IAR, so moving from intentionally manipulated reality to intentionally authentic reality. And then what you've just said as well there, integration. So those two things seem to really go hand in hand. And you've really painted those pictures as well of the elephant there's an elephant in the room whether we like it or not. So that idea of dealing with reality as it is rather than we wish it were. We might wish it weren't there, but it's right. It stood there right between us. So we can choose to ignore it. maybe go into the I'm all light, I'm okay, positive psychology, or we can look at that elephant. Or to use your other analogy, we can climb to the top of the mountain and look at the bombed village. And maybe the first step up the mountain is the abuse word. And then there's all these steps that need to be taken. But fundamentally, I guess the point I was getting at, which you've really validated and illuminated there, was if we want to move towards relational healing as well, until we can sit on that mountain and look at that bombed out village, we are not going to be able to hold that pain, sit with that pain, and attend in a way that provides safety and provides the conditions where healing might be able to happen.
Yeah, and I think, Chris, you're right. Turning away from the truth doesn't make the truth go away. And, turning away from it and just denying that it exists doesn't make it go away. So you're actually absolutely right. Whether we like it or not, having a secret sexual life is not just about sex. It's very much about this dishonesty part, which is a system of abuse. And so we have to help people look at that reality of abuse and trauma and come to terms with it and slowly digest it. And that's a really healthy process of shadow integration, psychological integration, creating consolidation of truth and reality, and creating wholeness and ego strength and ego health. And from that strength and health and consolidation, there's a lot more to bring to relational healing and the partner. And that solidness within the abuser becomes the solidness for which he can hold and help and attend to his partner. Rather than being mushy and fragmented inside and freaking out, there's consolidation and stability. And part of that stability is the integration of this very difficult piece of reality, which is the abuse and the trauma.
So again, it really summarizing the conversation we've had, starting with the problems, starting with the two-part problem of deceptive sexuality, not a one-part problem. So the behaviors that happen inside the basement, the CES, or compulsive entitled sexuality, and then the behaviors that keep the basement hidden, what we've called the integrity abuse behaviors. But then extending that to why does that happen? And fundamentally, we've got these three deceptively simple but profound terms: integrity, intimacy, and integration, which on the one hand, you can see from the conversation we've had today, the depth that is there and how overwhelming that might be. But on the other hand, as I said right at the start of this talk, to me provides a much more hopeful vision of what recovery can look like for an individual beyond I don't act out anymore to I am a person growing in, not perfect in, but growing in integrity, intimacy, and integration. So it's been very enlightening for me. I work with this stuff pretty much every week of my life now, very embedded in this model. And I am still learning, still being illuminated by these things. And so I appreciate the time you've been willing to give me and the depth you've been willing to go to on these topics.
Absolutely, Chris. And I'm honored and really, really invested in these conversations as part of getting my voice out there and this perspective out there so that people can treat each other better around these issues and have more to work with in terms of helping people. So I appreciate that you have, found this model and taken it on and trained in it. And that just now allows us to have deeper conversations about it. And that's why I like those, coffee with Chris. That's what I'll call it, coffee with Chris. So, it's nice to talk to someone who understands the same language and we can have these conversations. Yeah.
It feels like there's There's so much more around these topics, so much depth. We could talk about the human voice. We've talked so much about healthy masculinity, and we can maybe explore what a healthy version of that looks like. What are the frequencies of healthy masculinity? But I guess that brings us to the end for now of this first part of the 3 I's: integrity, intimacy, and integration. I've massively appreciated it, as I said. And I guess now that you've sort of christened it the Coffee with Chris, I guess I've got to bring a coffee next time. So
Bring your
I look forward
coffee,
to
everybody. Coffee with Chris and Dr. Minwalla. Yep.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the From Harm to Healing podcast. If you'd like to find out more information about the deceptive sexuality trauma model itself, you can visit minwallamodel.com. If you're interested in the services that I offer, in particular the From Harm to Healing treatment program, please visit chrisjonestherapy.co.uk.